I come from New Zealand, up here at the top of the world, and I've spent my life travelling around the world. I've been a teacher for 37 years. I've been a teacher of the skills of thinking and learning for the last 27 years. I've worked in 38 countries, over 300 schools, and over 250,000 students have been through my thinking skills course. And these days I mostly work in IB schools, mostly focused on the ATL skills. But the whole point of the exercise is helping students to do better at school, to do better with their academic subjects by making sure they have all the thinking and learning skills that underpin all their school subjects. So this is my hometown, a little town called Raglan on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand, very small, about 3,000 people. This is my office where I get all my work done over COVID especially, and these are my details. If you're welcome to send me any questions after the session, and that's my email address. Email is the best way to get me. It's all on that sheet, on the top of that sheet. So this is my family. I have 4 children. This is actually a couple of years old, this photograph now. But I have 4 children. I have 3 sons and 1 daughter, and I have 2 granddaughters. And I certainly have learnt a lot from my own children and helping to bring up my children. And this is the thing that some of the things I try and tell to parents. I've also written a lot of books, so these books are available. You can find writing that I've done if you do a Google search for Lance King. But if you just put in Lance King, you discover there's lots of us. It's a very common name. This is my favourite one, which isn't me 40 years ago, no. To get my work, you have to put the G in the middle. So Lance G. King should get any work that I have done. So that's all available there. This is my website, taolearn.com. It's on the sheet there. And there's a portal for parents. And in there is information. There's also information for teachers and information for students. So you're welcome to access all that. So we're all in the same boat, so to speak, as we've been through the pandemic, we've been through the lockdowns, we've been through a lot of difficulty and disruption to schooling, and you're probably concerned about the effects of the last 2 to 3 years on your children. But it wasn't all negative. There were some positives to come out of that experience. And one was that teachers became more technically literate. All teachers had to become better online, had to become more familiar with the websites that served information for their subjects. Or students were the same, became more technically literate. And of course there were a lot more and much more effective platforms built during that time. So there's a lot more expertise online and a lot more ways that children can learn by going online these days. And believe it or not, 20% of students actually improved their academic performance during that time, actually got better. And they were the students, welcome, come in. They were the students who had great self-management skills, were really good at working independently online. And that's an interesting thing, it wasn't all bad. And one of the challenges for education post-pandemic is to make sure we capture that improvement as well and keep it going. So there are lots of benefits to working online. It doesn't suit every single student, but it seems to me those skills of self-management are some of the most important skills of learning. And I think the skills of school success matched those of all future careers and business. Because when you think about it, what were the skills that a child needed to succeed well when we're in lockdown? Well, they had to motivate themselves, they had to organise themselves, they had to research well to find the right information, they had to determine what was true or not, they had to set their own deadlines, they had to work to deadlines, they had to do all the things that actually are the skills of every single job in the world these days, aren't they? And it was interesting. So there was a match there between future success and school success at that time. But we've got to think about, what do you want particularly from this school? So this is your objective as a parent. What do you want? Well, I imagine you want the school to help your children pass high-stakes exams. They've got their IGCSE exams and they've got their IB diploma exams. And it may not be your top priority, but you'd still like your children to succeed academically, I would think, in order to get good qualifications, in order probably to go to a good university, in order to be well prepared for 21st century life, and in order to make a positive difference in their chosen jobs, careers or businesses. I would imagine that's what you want. Is that what you want? Some of those things? And it's interesting because what it will enable children to do all those things. Because I think that the single unifying factor in all those things, achieving all those things, is becoming what are called expert learners. Now, what's an expert learner? Well, an expert learner is a child who is self-motivated, self-managed, autonomous, independent, and what we call lifelong learner. Yeah. They all kind of mean the same thing, don't they? Lifelong learners. So, sorry?
No, sorry.
That's right.
My first child used all those up.
Yeah. Excellent. So you've got to think, what are the characteristics of that expert learner? Because they're a person who's able to focus and concentrate, aren't they, when they need to. Now, focus and concentration is itself a really interesting thing, because we don't tend to specifically teach how to focus and concentrate, do we? And yet there's lots of good work which shows, that a lot of people today think that they can effectively multitask. But the evidence suggests that that's nonsense. Then of course you can do you can do lots of tasks. There's no problem with that, doing lots of tasks. But when you're concentration involves being focused on one thing at a time. Our minds can only really focus on one thing at a time. And when we say we're multitasking, what it means is we're switching. We're switching from this to this to this. And there's no problem with that. You can switch and switch and switch. But it means the depth of concentration in each area is reduced. Real concentration means focusing on one thing only. That idea of getting into a flow state, a deep concentration state, when you can produce huge amounts of performance. Performance is really high when you're in that flow state. But that's when you're focused on one thing only. And so what I've been talking to students today, a little bit about at least, is the idea of when they need to get their schoolwork done, when they need to get study done, they really need to switch everything else off and just focus in on one thing. But of course that causes them to be a little anxious because they want to be connected to their friends and things. So I suggest a 45-minute, 15-minute cycle. So on the hour, they switch off all their social media connections and their phone, but they set an alarm for 45 minutes. And so they get into deep concentration for 45 minutes, and then the alarm goes, and they check their phone, do all their messages and that for 15 minutes, and on the hour they switch it back off again. So 45 minutes of deep concentration will produce a huge amount of work. And then 15 minutes of checking what your friends are doing, and that is perfectly reasonable. But the idea is trying to get across to them is that deep concentration is what makes the serious difference when you're trying to study and learn. So these kind of things. It's a good ability. They obviously want children to be good time managers, to be well organised, to be self-motivated, hard-working and persevering. Now those are a whole other set of skills. You want them to be effective researchers, to have good information processing skills. You want the children to be critical and creative thinkers, and putting critical thinking and creative thinking together creates good problem solvers. You need both those styles of thinking, don't you, to be a good problem solver. And we need to teach children how to do both those things. We want them to be good communicators and collaborators. We want them information and media literate, responsible for their own actions, and self-evaluating, reflective, and self-correcting. Wouldn't that be good?
Awesome.
Would you like this magical individual to turn up in your house one day? This magic person. So you got to think, okay, so if that's what you would like to see, what is your role as a parent in helping produce that person? So if you would like this person to turn up, do you ever do any of these things? Because the whole point I'm trying to make is that, of course you have to do all these things for your children when they're little. But if you want your children to become expert learners, you want them to become self-managed, autonomous learners who can handle any situation and learn from any person in any place, take responsibility for their own actions, then at some point you've got to stop doing these things for children and teach them how to do all these things for themselves. And to me, that's the most important role of parents, is to not do things for their children, but at some point teach their children how to do these things for themselves. Because you are probably really good managers and organisers and motivators and all that. You know how to do it. So the challenge as a parent is to pass those skills across to your children, is to teach them how to do it, to make them more useful and less helpless Because the more we do for children, the less they learn to do for themselves. That makes sense? Yeah, and I mean, it's like that whole idea, you know, you have a child in a pram, and you push, or a stroller, whatever you call it in this country. And you know, of course you need the child to be in the pram when they're little. But when the child can walk, why would you put the child back in the pram? You know, it's like when the child can walk, the child needs to walk, right? Doesn't need to be pushed in the pram anymore, does it? And yet so often you see parents with like 5-year-old children still in some kind of walker, stroller, because the parent's in a hurry and needs to get somewhere fast and can't let well, you know, by doing that for the child, they're not teaching the child how to be independent, how to think for themselves, how to cope with the world. So it applies to all things. You know, we've got to help our children cope by teaching them the skills that we already have. And to me, it all comes back to learning, helping our children become brilliant at learning itself. And I think effective learning has 3 parts to it that I call efficacy, agency, and action. And by efficacy, I mean belief. They first must believe that through their own actions, they can create success for themselves and others. So they've got to believe that they can be effective in the world, that they can create success for themselves and others. And that is a belief. It's at the level of belief. Then they also must have training in all the thinking and learning skills they need for education and career success. They've got to know how to think and how to learn. And it is a big set of skills. And then thirdly, I think action. They must be prepared to take action, make mistakes, and do what I call fail well. So I'll explain all these 3 individually. So firstly, efficacy. How to build belief in the ability of the child to take action to produce success. Well, I think it starts with role models. And we need to put role models in front of our children. Role models of people who have generated success through resilience and perseverance and determination and all the things that we'd love to see in our children. And I think we can put stories of people in front of them. And because these stories are all around. So I just did a quick survey when I prepared these slides, and let me show you a few people that I picked out here. This is Eddie Alvarado, who's using artificial intelligence to detect and treat crop diseases. This person is Chiara Cecchini, a future food network, helping food companies become more eco-friendly. This person is Robin Blazer of Vinokilo, upcycling used clothing. This person is Savannah DeSavary, building ID non-profit, enabling local people to have a say in building projects. Robert Gabriel of Helpbird created a browser for the dyslexic. Jean Guo of Connexio, a non-profit workforce training for students. There's Kyle Grant, Oxywash, eco-friendly dry cleaning. Paloma Shakert, ethical apparel for Africa. Now the thing about these people is that they are all ethical entrepreneurs here in Europe. And they're all young, they're all under 30. That's probably the most important thing. Young ethical entrepreneurs in Europe. And I think these are some of the role models. I mean, you can find role models in sport and in every single area. I tend to focus on entrepreneurs because I think that's the way forward. I think we've got to help children to realise that their greatest ambition doesn't need to be to take a job. It could be to create a job. It could be to make employment. It could be to change the world through ethical entrepreneurship. And all I'm really saying is we've got to put these role models in front of children and talk about them so they can aspire to change the world in a positive way. And they aspire to achieve positive outcomes through their own actions by showing them people who have already done that. And of course, it's not just other people. It could be your own stories as well. And you need to tell your children your stories. But they shouldn't just be the stories of the successes you've had in your life. They should also be the stories of all the stupid and dumb things you've done in your life and what you learnt from each one. Because those are useful stories. You know, stories of success are all very well, but stories of mistakes are really, really good, especially if there's a lesson in there. There's something that you learnt from. Okay, so secondly in efficacy is self-confidence. Now, self-confidence is really interesting because I don't think we develop self-confidence through competition. Now, there's nothing wrong with competition. Competition's good. You know, it's good to see someone doing better than you and try to do better than them. But it doesn't produce self-confidence. We only get self-confident when we notice we have improved against ourselves. And so I think within a family it's really, really important never to compare children with other children, but to always focus on comparing the child with themselves and help them to notice. Imagine if you made little graphs and charts of a child's progress against themselves. One of the most useful things, what's the experience of school like for most children? Well, for a lot of children, it's just hard. It was hard last year, and it's hard this year, and I imagine it's going to be hard next year. Nothing changes. And they don't realise that they're progressing. One of the most useful things you can do is keep the old exercise books, and this year, say your child's in grade 5 or something, pull out the grade 4 exercise book and show them what they were doing last year. And they'll look at grade 4 and go, this is so easy, I could do this in my sleep. And then suddenly they realise they've improved. But unless they see, because they don't remember, unless they see that they have moved ahead from last year to this year, they get the feeling that nothing ever changes, it's always just hard. So that helps them build self-confidence, confidence that they are improving compared with themselves. That's important. Self-esteem. Self-esteem is a really interesting concept. It's hard to define, but it's something about what a person feels valued for as a human being. And I think that's very important to focus on those words, human being. Because sometimes I think I see parents who seem to value their children only as human doings. What they do, their performance, their outcomes, their grades, their scores, their performance, their sports, their dance, their drama, their music, the outcomes, the measures. And that's valuing a child for their performance as a human doing. Now, there's nothing wrong with valuing performance, it's perfectly fine. But I think first, we've got to make sure that we value every child as a human being. The wonderful human being they are needs to come first. What a good person they are. What good qualities they have. What good characteristics they have. We need to make sure that we're reinforcing all those. And then we can add on the doing part after that. So I think it's important to always tell your children, help them to realise what good people they are. And a lot of this comes through language. Language contains suggestions. Now, if I said to you, don't think of a giraffe, whatever you do, don't think of a giraffe. You can't not think of a giraffe, can you? And that's an interesting thing because the word don't doesn't make any connections in our mind at all. But think of a giraffe, sure, that's easy. But just think about the way in which you talk to your children. Because how much of what you say to your children is phrased around what you don't want them to do? Especially if you have teenage children. How much of the world is defined by what you don't want them to do, because there's a lot of dangers out there, there's a lot of problems, a lot of things you don't want them to do. And sometimes a child, I get the feeling that some teenagers can kind of get wrapped up in a bubble of don'ts. And they feel like, well, I can see what you don't want me to do, but what do you want me to do? So I think we've got to spend some time being very clear with our children how we would like them to be, rather than how we wouldn't like them to be. In other words, to eliminate the don'ts and focus on the do's. How do you want your child to be? What are the characteristics that you'd like to see in your children? How do you exemplify those characteristics? How do you make sure that your child is trying to be the best human being they can be? We've got to talk about how you want them to be, as well as pointing out the things that you don't want them to be. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's a good example. What can't you do? How many people here would say, I can't sing? Come on, be honest. How many people can't sing? How many people can't draw? How many people can't do maths, make things with their hands, be creative, be funny? Now that's interesting, isn't it? How many of you had children on one of my courses today? Have you seen them? Have you talked to them? No? Okay, passed, okay. They're probably still waiting for you downstairs. Okay. Because there was one thing I did with the children today which focused on this. Because what I said to them, and we could do this today, I said that what I want to do this evening is, I want to teach you how to do this. How would that be? See, I've got that bag full of juggling balls behind me. Would you like to get up and do this? So you're all panicking at this stage, aren't you? So what's going through your head right now? Probably something like, I can't do that. The man must be mad. I'll never get up and do that. He's not going to get me up there. Well, you see, what's happened is I've suggested you learn something new and you've thrown up a barrier straight away based on an I can't. Now, you see, when you think about it, is that very accurate? Because you don't know what your future holds. You only know what's happened in your past. So if you were being accurate, you might say to yourself, well, in the past I've never been any good at anything like that. In the past I've been terrible at ball skills. In the past hand-eye coordination has not been something in the past it's been terrible. I'm not sure that I would be able to do this. In the past it's been awful. But you see, it's not a can't. Because when you say I can't, you are saying it's an absolute. It's fixed in the body and there's no way you could possibly change that. That's where the students all started today as well. And I said to them, oh, is it a can't or is it just a haven't yet? And I said to them, imagine if you changed all your can'ts into, I haven't sung yet, but maybe I will. I haven't learned to draw yet, but maybe I will. Do you notice what changes? So as soon as you say can't, you will never ever take any action to try that out. As soon as you change it, well, it's true, I haven't learned to sing yet. It opens up the possibility that maybe you will. Who knows? But what you're doing is you're opening up your possibility. You're making sure that your future is much greater than your past. And this is what we have to do for children constantly. Make sure that they don't describe their future in terms of can'ts. Make sure they describe it in terms of, well, it's true I haven't done that yet. Who knows what I might do? Then that's opening up possibility. So I got all the grade 10s and the grade 12s to juggle today. And they all did it. By getting them to change their mental models, by getting them to change the way they talk to themselves and what they imagined. It's all right, I'm not going to do it for you, unless you really want me to. But you know, it's a great exercise because they look at juggling and they think it's impossible. I could never do that. And then they do, and they're astonished. And it's just by changing mental models. So I think we've got to be very careful about suggestion, and suggestion comes through language. So the way you talk to your children, I was never any good at maths, and I can't do maths, and I can't draw, and I can't... It's not a useful thing to tell a child. What's useful is to say, well, it's true, I haven't learned to draw yet. Who knows? Maybe I will in the future. That opens up possibility. You get the idea? Okay. So we've done that. And this is yes. So it's all about reaction to challenges. When your child faces a challenge, and they say, well, I can't do this, help them move from I can't to I haven't yet. Simple enough? So that's the efficacy piece. The agency piece is all about skills. So it's all in those notes that you've got there. Yeah, it's all in the notes. So the skills for success. Now this is just a little graph from the United States, whether it's, I think it's relevant here, I haven't got data from Germany. But what it's saying is that these were the hours worked in 2016, and this is the expected change by 2030. So physical and manual skills are expected to drop by 11%, basic cognitive skills will drop by 14%, higher cognitive skills will go up by 9%, social and emotional skills will go up by 26%, technological skills will go up by 60%. So this is the area we've got to focus on, making sure that our children are competent in all these areas. And this is the ATL Skills program. Yeah, this is what I designed for MYP and DP many years ago. And some of it is, I don't know what that was, some of it is due to this. You seen this stuff? Oops, this is not good. Are you aware of the advances in robotics these days? This is a couple of years old too, by the way. Probably much, I don't know what's going on here. It started doing this afternoon and I managed to get it to stop, but it started doing this. That's a bit spooky, isn't it? But that's robots for you. And I mean, of course, robots won't take away the poorest manual labour, but they'll take away the expensive manual labour. So the expensive jobs, the factory jobs, the jobs that require some thinking in the middle there, that will be replaced by robots in the very near future. And by 2030 in the developed world, it's expected that automation will be everywhere. You know, taxis, buses, trains, aeroplanes, In fact, it probably is already there. In fact, I was in an aeroplane not so long ago, and I was really amazed. We were coming into the airport, coming into land, and I'm not sure that the pilot realised everyone in the aeroplane could hear what he said, because he said, switching on automatic landing now. I thought, what? Surely that's one where a human hand on the wheel is important. No, switching on automatic landing. What do they need pilots for? It's just to hit the right button at the right moment. So automation is well advanced already. Manual work and permanent contract work are disappearing. Artificial intelligence, it's already there, isn't it? Netflix, it's all artificial intelligence. All your social media platforms, it's all artificial intelligence. Most work will be contracted, and most workers will be freelance and working online and involved in collaborative teams, and they already are. And selection for employability will be based on social media profiling. Now that's really interesting, isn't it? That your social media profile will actually determine whether you get selected for different roles. Not who you are, just who you look like online. Social media identity will be as important as real life identity. And the primacy of acquired knowledge will be superseded by the skills needed to find information, learn, adapt, create, and problem solve. Can I problem solve this problem with the projector? And that's been going all day reasonably well, but yeah, hopefully it'll be stable. Okay, so this is the economic forum. This is annoying. What is going on? I don't think it's that plug. I think it's this plug here. For some reason, just the wall slip.
This one.
Yeah. There's not a lot I can do. A bit of blue tack would be my solution. But anyway, these are the top skills in the World Economic Forum for 2025, which is just down the road. Analytical thinking, active learning, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, etc., etc., etc. All very easy to explain. This is a good quote by Andreas Schleicher, the OECD. He said that the world economy no longer rewards people just for what they know. The world economy rewards people for what they can do with what they know. It's about the doing. It doesn't mean that knowledge is unimportant. Knowledge is absolutely important, but it's how to do something with that knowledge that counts the most, which is the skills, the ATL skills, the thinking and learning skills. If you're interested, there are lots and lots of publications to look at, big reports produced by most countries about what are the most important skills for the future, but they're big boring documents, but there's lots of publications. And these process skills, these thinking and learning skills, are in most countries' national curricula now, but they're only taught in a few schools. So IB schools seem to be leading the way in this field because we've had this thing called ATL forever. And it is exactly the thinking and learning skills that everyone are promoting everywhere. So to me, the purpose of ATL skills needs to be very clear to children. And sometimes it's not clear. And I think it's all about control. Because think about it for a minute. At school, what do your children have control over? Because do they have control over who they're taught by? Or what they're taught? Or where they're taught, or when they're taught, or how they're taught, or who sets the tests, or who marks the tests? Of course not. They have control over none of those things. Now, for some children, that can lead to a sense of helplessness. They're in a system that's pushing them around and there's nothing they can do. And sometimes, helplessness, learned helplessness, Martin Seligman stuff, sometimes they just give up. There's nothing I can do, I'll just become passive and let the system push me around. So we've got to make sure that children realise there are two areas they have complete control over. The first is how much effort they put in. And of course, teachers are always trying to get them to put in more effort, but effort is something that's in their control. And the second is how they use that effort. In other words, what strategies they use for time and task management, for listening and concentrating, for researching effectively, for collaborating with others, for developing understanding, for remembering well, for setting and achieving goals, and for learning from feedback. And those are just some of the skills. I focused on quite a lot of these today. I only had the students for like a couple of hours, but I did focus on a lot of these things today. But those are the important things. Because if they're good at all these, then all the academic work happens by itself, because they're good at all the skills that underpin it. Does that make sense? These are basically the skills of the best learner, the skills of the best student at the school. And the whole idea of ATL is that no one should have a disadvantage in learning by virtue of not having the right skills. There are other disadvantages, but it shouldn't be a skills disadvantage, and so we give them all those skills. I think developing student agency is all about focusing students on factors to improve their success that are in their control. So it's about helping children to realise their success is in their control. Does that all make sense? Okay. The third part, taking action and failing well. I'll give you a break shortly. I'm talking too much, but I'll give you a break shortly. But this last piece is taking action and failing well. I think this is very important. Now, this is all about a study I did for my master's degree back in 2008. And for this study, I had 100 students at a high school in New Zealand. And these were students who ranged from grade 8 to grade 12, 100 students. And I was trying to find what factors went with their academic success. And halfway through my study, they all had a major exam. And some of them passed that exam at the very top level, did brilliantly. And some of them did reasonably well, given their academic level. And some of them did really badly, really poorly at the bottom. So I took out the middle group and just focused on the ones at the top compared with the ones at the bottom and tried to find something that went with that. And I wasn't getting anywhere till I asked them one particular question. And this is around this concept of failing well. And what it was, have you ever had a situation where you set a goal and you didn't achieve it? Have you ever had a situation like that? You set a goal and you didn't achieve it. Like if you're a student, it's like you sit a test and you want to get a really good mark and you don't get a really good mark. But it could be in a sports field. It could be you want to win the game and you don't win the game. Or it could be in a performance situation. You want to put on a good performance on stage or something and it doesn't happen. Or it could even be a relationship. You want to have a relationship's going well for a while and then it turns into a disaster. Everyone's had situations like that, right? And the question was, what did you do next after that? Because what it turns out is that all of the top academic students, that's 100% of the students who are in the top academic band, had learned how to do this thing I called failing well. And 100% of the students in the lowest academic group were doing the opposite, failing badly. So what do we mean by that? Well, it's about reaction to failure. So think about that situation in your life where you set a goal and you didn't achieve it. What did you do next? Because someone who fails well will probably do something like acknowledge their failure. They'll say, yes, I failed, it's true, it happened, it's a fact. They won't necessarily have a big emotional reaction. They'll deal with it fairly pragmatically. And then they'll take responsibility for all the factors that were in their control. So they'll look at, what did I do that influenced that? What was a good thing to do and what was not such a good thing to do? So they'll work out what they could have done better, they'll make changes, and then they'll go back and they'll do it again. But they'll make sure they do it again differently the second time and the third time and the fourth time right. They'll make a change every time. That's failing well. It's simple, isn't it? It's a model for sports, but it also works as a model for academic success. And so all the top academic students were doing this by themselves. They'd learned how to do that themselves. Whereas the students at the bottom were doing things like blaming the school or the system. It's not my fault, it's the school's fault. It's a dumb school. Or they were blaming other people. It's not my fault, it's a teacher's fault. The teacher didn't teach me the right things. Sometimes parents can do this as well, of course. Some students were pretending there is no failure. These were students who were doing really poorly, but they were saying, no, just ignore it, it'll go away, it'll be fine. You recognise any of your children here? Adding drama to failure to avoid dealing with it. I can't go to school today, Mum, everyone's going to laugh at me, I've got a good B on my assignment. That kind of hysteria that some people add to a minor failure. I've got to be a little careful here because for some students the emotional reaction around failure is serious. But those students need professional help, they need therapeutic help. I'm just talking about those who add a little hysteria to it to avoid dealing with it. Or avoiding any activity that could possibly lead to failure. This was a group of students who would never ever choose to do anything that they weren't already good at. So only do what they felt good at already. And if a teacher ever made them take an option that they didn't feel comfortable with, as soon as possible they would drop it and go back to what they were already good at. And so this becomes significant. And it becomes significant, and let's say your child sits a test at school and doesn't get the results they want. So in this test, on receiving test results worse than they expected or hoped for, Some children will blame the school, blame the teacher, blame the weather, blame themselves. Now, I'm no good at this, and that's what I'm calling failing badly. Whereas other students will take the test home, look at the questions they got wrong, and do some research and find out what the right answer is and rewrite the answer to the questions they got wrong. And then they'll take those rewritten answers to the teacher the next day and say to the teacher, are they right now? And ask the teacher to confirm that they've got the right answers now. Not to get extra grades or scores or marks, just to make sure they've now got the right answer. And then they might ask the teacher what they can do to improve. Now that's failing well. And it's very, very simple. It's about reprocessing every mistake. It's about never letting a mistake go past without doing something about it. And that ties, as I said, correlates precisely with academic high success. So that's worth looking into. It's worth doing. So I now want to introduce you to my family under this heading, Education is Not a Race, because I've got 4 children and they exemplify this thing here that I'm going to talk about. Because 2 of my children did brilliantly at school and 2 of them did not so well. And so I put this in because I do find in some cultures that I go, 38 countries I've worked in some places I go to, some parents seem to be very, very focused on pushing their children through education as if it is some kind of a race. And I just want to point out some things about that. So in my family, the best academic was my daughter. And, oops, that shouldn't have come up first. Okay, we'll deal with it. So we're only looking at this photo to begin with. So this is my daughter's the one on the right. So that she was the best academic in our family. She did brilliantly at school, always got the top grades, top performance all the way through school, went straight from school into university, got the top grades in university, right through to a master's degree, straight through, and majored in English and media studies and went straight into a job as a social media marketing manager for an app development company. And now she's a lecturer at a massive university in VR and AR. So her pathway has been stellar. And exactly what a parent would want, right? Everything perfectly in line, perfect, brilliant. And now she's got a little daughter, so she's doubly perfect, and so that was fine, okay? And then my second oldest son did similar. He didn't perform as well as his sister, but he did pretty well. He got all the necessary requirements at school and went straight from school to university, did a degree in, what was it called? Online finance. Has a special name.
Digital currency?
Something like that. A degree in financial transactions online. There's a word I'm searching for, I haven't got. Anyway, and he went straight into a job in that field, and he's still in that field of online banking and online money transfer 10 years later, and he's done brilliantly. Once again, straight line path, everything exactly as your parent would want, perfect. And then there was my oldest son. And my oldest son, he went through school pretty well, didn't do as well as his siblings, but did okay. But he got to his final year, the grade 12, we call it year 13 year, and he comes to my wife. He's been at school for this last year, about a third of the last year, and he comes to my wife and I and says, I've had enough of school, I'm leaving, I want to drop out. I said, what? He only had like 6 months to go and he would have the school qualification. He said, no, I've finished with that, I want to go. I said, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? He said, I want to go to Italy. Why Italy? He couldn't really tell us, but anyway, I was totally fixated on going to Italy. And we managed to get him involved in an student exchange program. You have to write down 3 choices of countries you want to go to. He wrote Italy. So there was an exchange program. Some students came to New Zealand from Italy, and some students from New Zealand went to Italy. And we said, okay, are you prepared to work hard to achieve this? And he said, yes. So he took on 2 after-school jobs. We didn't let him leave school. Took on 2 after-school jobs and worked really, really hard at some fairly menial work until he saved up half the money that he needed to go to Italy. So we provided the other half and he went off. And he went to Italy. He was very, very lucky. He landed in a wonderful Italian family who looked after him absolutely fabulously, and they were super, super nice to him. And eventually their son came and lived with us for a couple of years, and it all worked out really well. But we didn't know that in advance. And 8 months down the track, he was fluent in Italian, which I think was one of the reasons he went. But anyway, he managed to master Italian up to a reasonable level. And then he came back to New Zealand. So now he's like 19 years old or so, yeah, he'd be about 19, 18 and a half, back in New Zealand. He's got no school qualifications and he's fluent in Italian, which I have to say is not a terribly marketable skill in New Zealand. And so he can't get a job, nobody wants to hire him, so he has to do a whole lot of menial jobs. So he's delivering pizzas and he's door knocking and trying to sell things to people that they don't want at prices they can't afford, and not making any money at all. And he did that for 2 years because he's really stubborn. And then finally he decided that I'm sick of this, I think I better go to university. So he went to university and he did a management degree and did really, really well at it, and went and now works for our biggest company, Fonterra, and he's kind of a middle manager and doing really, really well. But the point of that story is that we could have pressured him to stay at school. And for that last 6 months, we could have told him he wasn't allowed, because we still had control. We could have told him he's not allowed to stay, and what that would have produced would have been a whole lot of antagonism. And he probably never ever would have gone on to higher education. But because we said, yeah, sure, go and do it, you know, if you're prepared to work hard and you're prepared to set goals and achieve them, then do it. And he did it, and eventually he decided to go to university on his own back. And it worked out really well. And this is his graduation photo. That's the one I went to Italy, and that's my second oldest, who went straight through. But because of the difference in ages, they actually went through university together. So it worked out brilliantly. So that's an interesting part of the story. So putting pressure on him to stay at school wouldn't have helped. And then, of course, I had to prove to my children that even really elderly people can get education. So I went back to university and got my master's degree at 50 years old. And so that's my graduation photograph from university, my second degree. And then my youngest boy had always hated school, always, from even little, when he was at primary school. He never really enjoyed it, he never felt like he fitted in, he never succeeded well. He barely scraped through with the minimum possible pass rate all the way through school. He got to grade, we would call it year 12, you call it grade 11. He got to grade 11, just starting grade 11, and he comes to my wife and I and says, I've had enough, I'm out of here, I'm leaving. And we said, okay, you know, it's never been a good experience, so what do you want to do? And he said, I want to be a carpenter. And so it seemed like a good idea, so he joined an apprenticeship program and started to learn to be a carpenter, and spent 2 years doing the apprenticeship in the kind of workshop situation. But then he was supposed to connect with a builder and go out and work with a builder, but that was exactly 2007 or something when the recession hit and no builders were taking on apprentices, so he couldn't get a job. So by this stage he was 18 years old, he had no school qualifications and no trade qualifications. So he couldn't get a job almost with anyone. So he ended up working as a builder's labourer, which in New Zealand is pretty tough work. You know, you're the one who digs all the holes and does all the really tough jobs, and in the terrible winter weather that we have. And he did that work for 2 years. And then he decided that working knee-deep in mud all day was not an attractive prospect for a young man. So he came to us and said, I want to go to university. Excellent. Now, it was really difficult for him because he had to go back to school and finish off his schooling. Now, he's taller than me, and so he was in class with kids way smaller than him, still finishing off his schooling. He got through that, and then he went to university, and he had to do 2 things. He had to do a study skills course to prove that he could study at university, and he had to do some kind of graduation, some kind of course before they would let him start. So that took another year out of his time, but he finally got to university. He did a degree in geography and psychology and got A passes all the way through. And it was effortless for him. And he finally discovered that when he was motivated and when he was interested, he could do academic work as good as anyone else. And that was a real turning point for him, and he's just gone on to do better and better things, and he has a wonderful job now and really does well. And this is his photo here. This is my son on the left, And you probably don't know who this guy is, but he was New Zealand's Prime Minister for 12 years. And so my son obviously has powerful friends. But the point of the story is that he would never have gone to university if he hadn't gone through all that hardship. And so putting pressure on children to achieve our academic goals, what we want for them to do, will not work. It's got to be their goals. And at some point, we have to be prepared to allow them to fail, to do what we think of as failing. But not leave them in the gutter or anything, support them. We helped all these children and we supported them as best we could right through their difficulties. So obviously lots of support, but still they had to come to the realization themselves that tertiary study was worth doing. And so this is my theme here, is that education is not a race. And sometimes we've got to let children make their own decisions, even if we think those decisions are not great decisions. Because if we allow them to do that, they will probably come to the realization that higher level education is worthwhile. They'll come to that realization themselves. Okay, so my concern is of course all about at-risk children. And at-risk children were once upon a time easy to identify because they came from disadvantaged backgrounds. But these days, this is certainly in the United States, I'm not sure it's here, but it might be, America's newly identified at-risk group is preteens and teens from affluent, well-educated families. In spite of their economic and social advantages, they experience amongst the highest rates of depression, substance abuse, physical complaints, and unhappiness of any group of children in the country. And this is interesting, it's a terrible situation. And there's a really good book, if you're interested in this, called The Price of Privilege by Dr. Madeline Levine. And she said the two main contributing factors come from parents. That's us. Achievement pressure and isolation. Parents who are over-involved in the wrong things and under-involved in the right things. What she's talking about is parents who are only involved in the academic progress of their children. In other words, the only conversations they ever have are, how are you doing? What are your grades? What are your scores? What are your marks? What can we do? Do you need another laptop? Do you need another textbook? Can I get a tutor for you? How can we push you up to that highest grade? And that doesn't help, because that's not what children need. I have experience, for 13 years, I worked at one of the top schools in London. When I say worked there, I went there for 1 day per year for 13 years. So this is one of the two top private boarding schools for boys in London. And it's full of dukes and earls and all the all these sort of people. And those boys were from hugely wealthy families, and they had every advantage in the world except one. The one thing they all wanted more than anything else in the world was more time with their parents. And that was a really good lesson for me, because this is the price of privilege. And that's all children want. They want a heart connection with their parents. They want an emotional connection with their parents. They don't want anything else. Grades, scores, marks, they don't care. That's not important. What's important is to know they have an emotional connection with their parents. And sometimes that's lacking. So how do we grow resilient children? How do we grow resilient children who can cope with the world and life? I think we've got to start by encouraging them to take on new challenges. Encourage them to push themselves. Encourage them to do things that they're not comfortable with and use failure as feedback. And help them to notice any strategies they have for recovery from adversity. When they fall over, when they get down, how do they get themselves back up again? Help them to notice those things. Help them to notice that they can do that. That's important. This is my children when I took them bungee jumping. Yeah, bungee jumping in Frankfurt? Yeah. In New Zealand, it's quite a big thing. So, but this is what I want to talk about with regards to this heart connection thing, social media. This was in beginning of 2022, the most used social media platforms, and the highest one was Facebook with 2.9 billion. Now that was the beginning of 2022. It's out of date. By October 2022, TikTok had 3 billion users. 3 billion. And you realise that TikTok is owned by ByteDance, which is a Beijing firm which is heavily influenced by the Chinese government. You realise that the TikTok version you can get in China is completely different to the TikTok version you can get outside China. That the TikTok version outside China is full of horror. You've got to realise this. And what a lot of parents are finding is that social media as a whole is creating distance between themselves and their own children. And there's a great guy, Gabor Mate, on attachment, well worth reading. And he says that 50 years ago, when I was a child, all children's orientation was vertical. And what that means is that children were looking to the adult world for appropriate role models, looking to parents, grandparents, adult heroes for behavioural compass, in other words, how to behave. And that was true of me. My heroes were Sterling Moss, the racing car driver, and Bruce McLaren, who's a racing car driver, and Sir Edmund Hillary, who climbed Everest, and all those, and rugby players, and all those kind of people. So if I had to work out how to behave, I would look to them. Well, things have changed in the last 50 years. Now, most teenagers' orientation is horizontal. In other words, they are looking to peers and similar age group influences for role models. And I have to say, the worst person for a 14-year-old boy to look at in order to work out how to behave is another 14-year-old boy. And yet that's what's happening. They're using peers as behavioural compass, how to work out how to behave, which creates dissociation from adults. And it does create the strength of a like-minded group, but it also creates a loss of adult wisdom and the increased likelihood of making a really, really bad decision. Now this is significant, and it's all related to social media. And of course I don't need to probably go into it, but I think the key principles I try and teach students about social media, number one, is that everything you post is there forever. You know, you think you delete something from Facebook, you think it's gone? Of course not, it's still there. Someone can find it. And if the service is free, then you are the product. All your data is being sold. All these platforms are nothing to do with connectivity between human beings, they're to do with selling advertising. I'm sure you know. And of course what happens is the more, when you click on something, the algorithm starts feeding you more of that. And do you know what the 4 highest things that attract clicks are? They're outrage, hate, violence and disgust. Those are the 4 tops. Outrage, hate, violence and disgust. That's what gets clicks. And if you click on that, it starts feeding you more of that. And TikTok is the worst. But the others are fairly bad as well. So it starts feeding you more of that. And the problem is then you start seeing all this and you start to think, as a child, you start thinking that that's real. Like that's normal. That's what everyone gets. That's the majority viewpoint. And that's what you call a rabbit hole. And people just end up going down rabbit holes. And it's a horror. And we've got to be very careful about social media. Very careful. Because most kids just think, who cares? Who cares? It's not important. But suggestion and influence are important. And the only control that anyone has is over engagement, careful choice over connections, links, likes and views, and of course installing ad blocking software where you can. There are some things. So that's right, the key things here are, did you realise that it was in 2007 that the first iPhone was produced? 2009, the like button was produced and face tagging was possible. By 2010, you were able to like individual comments, and by 2011, sharing and retweets became possible. So it was all around 2008, 2009, 2010. And when you look at mental health diagnosis, proportions of emergency department visits with a mental health discharge diagnosis. In other words, they've been to an emergency department, and when they're discharged, their diagnosis is they've got a mental health problem. Look at the 2009, 2010, 2011. This is 10 to 14-year-olds. This is 15 to 17-year-olds. Over here we've got adults, same thing. Here we have 26 to 44-year-olds. Here we have 18 to 25-year-olds. This one's about depression, increasing rates of depression. 2009, 10, 11, they start to go up. Notice this, it's significant. This is the worst, I apologise if this upsets anyone, but this is Molly Russell. And Molly Russell, in 2016, I believe it was, or it might have been 18, she committed suicide. And the coroner has just last year come out with a verdict. And this is the coroner's verdict. Coroner Andrew Walker of the Northern District of Greater London said her death was an act of self-harm while suffering from depression and the negative effects of online content. And he also said the online material Molly viewed on platforms including Instagram and Pinterest was not safe and should not have been available for a child to see. It's the first time anyone in a very senior official position has come out and put the finger directly on social media. People are calling this, the nicotine, the cigarette moment. The moment where the cigarette companies had to admit that they'd known about the harm that their product was doing for the last 20 years, and they'd finally had to admit it. Well, people are saying this is the big tobacco moment for social media, but who knows? Social media companies are bigger than countries, so they're very difficult to regulate. So what can we do? Well, there's a few things we can do. I think we can, you see, if a child's social media profile, or everything they've done on social media, reflected their true character as a good human being, then they wouldn't get anywhere near as much of the awful stuff. And so we've got to help our children to understand their own virtues and their own values, who they are as a person, especially who they are as a person online and offline, and who they want to be. And also the difference between reputation and character. What is on social media? Is it your reputation or your character? It's all about reputation, it's not about character. So if we made that presence online all about character, what a good person they were, then they would get more positive feed sent to them. Create an online identity focused on strengths, goals, and exemplifying virtues. Find positive, inspirational people to follow. Make ethical choices about likes. And set up and maintain strong relationships that exist both on and offline. Those are all critical points. And the last one is, this comes from Gable Matte I was talking about before. He said, and I've done this with my children, that taking regular, deliberate digital holidays. Now, I said I've got 4 kids. So what I used to do was, when I could, I would take one child away on holiday. Just for a weekend or just overnight or, just for a short holiday. But just one child. Because, we had family holidays, you have all the kids and both parents, and those are great. But that's not the special connection. The special connection happens when you just take one adult and one child away on a holiday together. And these days, I would add to that, set up a contract whereby neither of you is going to use your phone. Especially with a teenager. So you put the phones in the glove box and you lock it, right? And then you're driving. So what's going to happen? Well, for the first hour, they're going to sit there snarling, and, I hate this, and on. And you just keep on driving. In the second hour, they're going to be silent. By the third hour, they're going to have to talk to you. There's no one else to talk to. They're going to have to. And that's when you start having really meaningful conversations. Because you have to talk about things, to have to talk about their lives, and have to talk about their hurts and their pain and their suffering and all the things that are going on for them. But you only do that if you get rid of the phone. And those are the conversations that re-establish that emotional attachment between parents and kids that's being lost because of the interference of the phone. And so you've got to set up opportunities to get out of, another way to do it is to go for a holiday somewhere where there is no reception. Same thing will happen. First day, everyone will be really angry and bored. By the second day, they have to start talking, So, those things I think we have to do on purpose these days, because they're not going to happen if we just carry on our normal lives. Because normal lives are so influenced by social media. Okay? So, have you had enough yet? This is my recommendation of stuff to read. Johan Hari's got a great book called Stolen Focus. Tristan Harris has got The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. It's a documentary. Yeah, everyone's watched that. Tristan Harris now has a podcast called Your Undivided Attention, really worth listening to, and has the Centre for Humane Technologies is really worth having a look at. So I've actually got a bit more stuff. Are you interested in hearing more learning techniques? Okay. So this is interesting stuff. This is Professor Dweck from Stanford University on praise. Now, she's been a wonderful researcher for like 30, 40 years. And stuff she says about praise is really interesting, because imagine your child has done something wonderful. You know, a wonderful school mark, or performance, or something really good. And you want to say to them, well done, that's brilliant, well done. What do you focus your praise on? Because it seems to make a difference. Because if you focus your praise on effort, you're saying to the child, it's wonderful to see how hardworking you are, how determined you are, how persistent you are. What you're doing is you're connecting your praise to something the child has control over. They can do more or less of it. And that's a wonderful thing, because they feel they've got control over their own success. So then any test or assessment is just a measure of progress and an opportunity to learn. It's nothing to be worried about. But if you focus your praise on ability, you're saying to the child, it's wonderful to see how smart you are, how talented you are, how intelligent you are. Those words suggest something that's fixed. And so what you're doing is you're connecting your approval, your praise, to something that the child has no control over. They can't do more of it. So therefore, every assessment is a critical judgment and an opportunity to fail. So, you know, you've got to make sure that all your praise is focused on something a child can do more of. So that's focus any praise for achievement on observed effort rather than ability. Help them develop all the skills of the self-managed expert learner, all those skills I've been talking about, and help them realise that developing those skills is their best method of improving their academic performance. It's not focusing on the subject, it's focusing on how they learn the subject. That's what's going to make the biggest difference. And make sure they have a place to do schoolwork which suits them physically. You know, a desk, a chair, a light, all that physical stuff actually makes a difference, and it should grow as they grow. Help build good habits of study. You know, habits are important because they don't need any reinforcing. Habits of when they get their work done and when they do give themselves rewards and stuff. Teach them how to make good decisions by involving them in all the family decision making that affects their lives. You know, you want your children to be good decision makers. Don't make all the decisions for them. Involve them in the process. You know, the worst thing is when the parent decides what subjects the child is going to do, what university they're going to go to, what career they're going to have. All that's going to produce is rebellion, because children like to be involved in the process of making decisions about their lives. And it teaches them how to be a good decision maker if you involve them in the process. Help them learn to use the things they enjoy as rewards for getting work done. You know, it's great to have your Xbox and like playing on your Xbox, but as long as you do that after you've got the study done, then it's fine. The problem is when the boy says, oh no, I'll just play on my Xbox for an hour and then I'll get my homework done. Yeah, right. No, and then you have to you have to get your hours up, get on with your work. No, they've got to learn how to do that themselves. Do the work first and do the Xbox later. So one way to do that is say, I'm going to lock the Xbox in the cupboard and you can get it when you've done your work. Whatever, you know, use whatever mechanisms possible, because learning to delay gratification is very closely connected with success. To remember what they learn at school, each night they need to read over what they did that day. That's critically important. Every night, doesn't matter what age they are, every night they should be going through what they did in class that day, because it remakes the connection in their brain that they made in the class. Encourage them to form study groups. Study groups have been shown to be the biggest and made the biggest difference in academic improvement in children. Forming study groups. So they just have a group of 3 friends or something, they get together once a week and they teach each other. I've just learnt this stuff, or I've just learnt this stuff. What happens is the child doing the teaching of the other child learns better, because you never learn anything properly until you have to explain it to someone. And the child being explained to learns as well, because the other child is able to put things in language that they'll understand. So both parties learn. It's a wonderful idea. Study groups are brilliant. So your role should be to ferry cups of tea and biscuits and whatever it takes to keep them working together. And online groups are fine, but in physical proximity is probably better. The idea of success through learning is picked up best by imitation. Make the culture of your family a learning culture. What I mean by that is if a child in the family is the only one who's learning, then they feel isolated and they don't feel motivated. But if everyone in the family is always constantly talking about, did you see this today? Did you see this on the news? What do you think about this? What do you think about Germany buying gas from Russia? Have conversations about world events and conversations about things that are going on. That encourages that child because that child feels they're not the only one in the family that's learning. Everyone's learning, everyone's engaged with keeping abreast of what's happening in the world, and everyone's having conversations around what's going on. That means everyone's a learner. But of course, as soon as you realise that your children are going to imitate you, which of course they will, the hardest thing is to be worthy of imitation, isn't it? And that's the hardest role for all parents, to be worthy of imitation. Okay, I've just about finished. Just to sum up, to get to where you are today, how many of you had to work hard? Anyone have to work hard? Anyone have to suffer physically, mentally, emotionally? Everyone have to forego any pleasures? Anyone suffered personal or business setbacks? And how many of you want to give your children the benefits of your struggles without them having to go through the distress? This is the modern thing. I don't want you to have to suffer the way I suffered. I want to make your life much easier. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. Because how many of you think that the difficulties you've faced, the problems you've overcome, the suffering you have endured have helped you to develop the resilience you need to create the success for yourself and your family you enjoy today? So the solution is, what we've got to do for our children is make them suffer. Right? No, what I mean is, so why protect your children from responsibility and the possibility of failure? You don't do them any favours by protecting them from those things. So what I suggest is, all our children need to learn how to put in effort to earn what they get. They need to learn how to organise their own lives, take responsibility for their own actions, fight their own battles, make their own decisions and take all the consequences, succeed, and on the way to succeed, fail well. And I'll finish off with a great quote from a German philosopher I'm very much in favour of. He says, "Too many parents make life hard for their children by trying too zealously to make it easy for them." And that was Goethe back in 1780 or something. It's a good one, isn't it?